Buongiorno dalle colonie extramondo. Poiché il nostro team era diviso in due circa l'intervista precedente, per alcune contraddizioni del racconto, vi proponiamo una seconda intervista a Kevin Day, molto simile all'altra, ma più dettagliata e con contenuti aggiuntivi, più lunga e purtroppo con un audio pessimo non per colpa nostra. Poiché Kevin Day era il capo dei controllori di volo della USS Princeton, per la sua posizione, il suo grado, la sua esperienza è un testimone molto autorevole. Per tutto il resto vi rimandiamo al video precedente dove abbiamo spiegato chi era Kevin Day. Oltre alle differenze dalla precedente intervista, i due concetti che crediamo importanti che emergono da questa vicenda sono la reazione immediata della Princeton all'avvistamento e la cancellazione dei dati da supporti ottici non cancellabili, una questione totalmente affascinante.
My name is Robert Powell and I'm conducting an interview with Kevin Day regarding his role on the USS Princeton on November 14th, 2004.
Okay, my name is Kevin Mark Day. The actual incident, the UFO encounter happened on November 14th, and it was early morning, approximately 9:30 a.m. in the morning, Pacific Standard Time. And we were underway with the Princeton, the Higgins, the JT, the Nimitz, and the USS Louisville, which is a submarine, in addition to 5 attached air wings for the Nimitz. And the squadrons involved were DFA 41, DMFA 232, and DAW 117. We're about 100 miles off the coast of San Diego, and approximately on November 10th or so, I started noticing these anomalous, we call them anomalous aerial vehicles, AAVs. And strangely enough, I didn't really notice anyone else noticing them, which kind of torqued me a little bit because that's what we're out there to do, find stuff. And if you don't know what something is, you should be trying to find out. Now, on the morning of November 14th, we're getting ready to kick off the air defense exercise where we're going to launch all the aircraft off the carrier. And I was concerned because we had these objects in the sky and we were getting ready to launch a bunch of aircraft. And at the very least, they were potential hazard to air navigation. So when Captain Smith came down to combat, it's like, look, sir, and I kind of briefed him on what I was seeing and why I wanted to intercept them. And he said, go ahead, intercept them. And that's when the fast eagles who were already airborne took our vector to the spot. Now, it's interesting to note that the Super Hornets never did have radar contact. They had contact on their AT first, which is an advanced threat forward infrared-looking radar, but not on their APG-73s. Now, we had all the Aegis cruisers and Aegis destroyers had contacts on their Spy 1 radars, as well as our cooperative engagement system, which basically takes all the radars from every source and integrates it into one picture. So I was pretty darn certain that these things were real, whatever we were seeing. And these things were going down, they were starting about 80,000 feet when I first saw them. And then they would suddenly just drop down in altitude in a matter of less than a second. I think I looked, when I did some data refraction on it, it was 0.78 seconds. From 80,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean. So anyway, the Fast Eagles went over to take the vector. They obtained a visual on the contacts, and these things dropped straight out of the sky, went down in the ocean. Pilots were screaming. Everybody on the radio is screaming because it's extremely bizarre. They've never seen anything like this. And the pilots go back up in altitude, and these things come straight back out of the water. Again, about 0.78 seconds. Back up to 80,000 feet, and continue to track south about 100 knots. Which was strange, because there was a whole fleet of them above us, all going about 100 knots. At anywhere from altitudes 28,000 feet up to about 80,000 feet. Actually, maybe even higher because it was above the scan volume of our radar at the time. The rest of the aircraft, a bunch of other aircraft launched off the carrier, and some of of the other ships took control of the launching interceptors. And before I knew it, we had all these objects falling out of the sky. There was probably 14 of them at the time, and it was going choo, 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 all around. They were coming out of the sky, straight down into the, either into the water or just above the water. It was hard for me to tell because I was observing radar on the ship. And as soon as the aircraft left the merge plot, which is they're basically in the same proximity as the contact they've been vectored to, these things all shot straight back out of the water, back up to their previous altitudes, and continued tracking south about 100 knots, like nothing had happened.
And let me ask you this: as they were dropping out of their 80,000 foot altitude points, how long would that go on before they went back up, and how were the jets reacting to that?
The entire, from the time they merged plat with the interceptors to the time the interceptors kind of became confused and went back up to their assigned altitudes, and the objects popped back out of the water is probably maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes. We got all done, and of course, everybody on all the ships. I had fellow chiefs and senior chiefs on the other ships, and back channel we're talking about this thing. So, and none of us could really figure it out because it wasn't something within any of our experiences. So the next morning, I get up and I go to our comms because I want to do an after action report, and we record everything on the optical disc on the ships in multiple tracks. So in case an event occurs, an investigation can be done. We can find out what the heck happened. As it turns out, all of our comms have been erased. Now, every time you key a mic on the ship, it stamps the optical disc with the date and time stamp. All the date and time stamps were there, but the actual comms were all missing. And that was another anomalous thing because as far as I know, I don't even think that's possible. But it happened. So, given everything that happened and the integration of all the radars on the ship and the operators and the visuals obtained by the air crews, I can guarantee that this was not an equipment malfunction. There's no way. Our equipment was working perfectly. And just as a note, by the way, we had a VAW 117, which is a E2 Hawkeye squadron. They initially had control of the Fast Eagles, and then my air controller, and I won't say his name right now. We can do that maybe at a later interview because I haven't talked to him. Right. I don't want to say anybody's name that's not already on the record.
I agree.
For obvious reasons. The A117 didn't have at the time they had the ATS 145 radar, which has since been upgraded to the APY9. But anyway, they also had contact. So the Spy 1 radars and the ATS 145 radars had actual radar contact on the objects. As far as I know, the radars on the Super Hornets did not. So the AP-73s.
Did the Nimitz have radar contact?
Absolutely.
Okay, so Nimitz.
Absolutely. In fact, that was the first one in the strike group, as far as I know, to actually detect the objects. And I detected on the Spy 1 Delta radar.
Okay. And was there a reason, Kevin, that the Princeton took control of the Fast Eagles rather than the VAW 117?
Yeah, because Princeton was assigned duties as the air defense commander for the strike group, and our job was primarily air defense of the strike group, and our systems are more capable, and we had better radar information and better situational awareness, so we took control of the aircraft.
Do you have any idea of the quality of the VAW 117's radar image of the objects?
I don't. To be honest, I don't. No, I've flown in an E2 Hawkeye. I've actually piloted the aircraft from one time from El Centro back to Miramar under the direction of the pilot. And so I have controlled aircraft in the back, and their radar displays are in no way comparable to what we see on the ships. It's a much more difficult platform to control aircraft with. So I'm not real certain. I've been informed they had radar contact, but I'm not sure how good it was.
Okay.
Now they had our data links, so they had the symbology for the tracks in their data warehouse. And when they look at their display, they can see the symbol, and then underneath that they can see the radar return. But they were also convinced that there was something there.
You indicated that there were a number of AAVs. How many do you think approximately?
They came in groups over the course of, I've been watching them 3-4 days, and they would come out, and I would see a group of 8, and I'd come back later, and there'd be a group of 14, and then I'd come back later, and there'd be a group of 20, and then come back later, and be a group of 17. And whether they were all the same aircrafts, or different ones on different days and different times, but altogether, if I had to count them all up, it was probably more than 50.
Okay. Any chance that these could have been some type of simulation?
Absolutely. My ideas for what these things were is totally open. Totally open. It could very well have been some sort of government experiment to see if we would even notice them. How would we react? What would we do? But you know what, Robert? I just don't know. I kind of have to concur with the air crews when I say that I don't believe that they were from this earth. That's just my personal feeling. I don't really have nothing to qualify that statement with, other than just my observations.
Okay, and what speed? So far, you've given me information which relates two different types of speed. One, roughly 100 knots when they're at 80,000.
Which normally stuff would fall out of the sky at that speed.
Oh, right, yeah. Unless it turned into...
Which was anomalous. So we're like, what the heck?
So we have that speed, and then the speed, which I could calculate, to go 80,000 feet to the surface in 0.78 seconds. So yeah,
it's impossibly fast.
Right, that's very fast.
And please note, there was no sound barrier. There was no sonic booms during this whole thing.
Okay. And was there any other speeds besides those two speeds that you detected the objects moving at?
Nope, they were either going extremely slow, 100 knots, or extremely impossibly fast.
Okay.
There was no in between.
All right, and then you mentioned...
at least not on radar. Now, in the visual arena with the aircraft, when they were actually engaged with these objects, I've heard that the commanders say they were probably going between 600-700 knots when he was actually in the visual arena with them. So there's a third speed there, but that was not detectable on my system.
Right. When
I think he was guessing. As well, because he didn't have a radar contact.
Right. So when they have a merge plot, do you know how close the jet has to be to the other target for it to become a merge plot?
Visual. Usually in the visual arena, they gain visual contact on it. They'll get a vector, and it could be 60, 100 miles away, and we'll vector them into that location in space. And they'll gain it on radar, typically. And then they'll come in and they'll tell us their visual. And then once the symbology on our scope, we have a symbol for the interceptor and a symbol for the target. And once they're on top of each other, we call it merge plot.
Right. I was just wondering if by chance you knew an actual distance at which point that occurs.
I don't know if I should say.
Oh, okay. No, that's all right. That's fine. And any questions I ask, Kevin, that you feel you shouldn't answer, that's completely all right. Okay, so, and I could see that could...
It's approximately a mile.
And do you know about how many targets did they visually see?
No, that's a very good question, and I don't really have real good clear answers on that. But on their system, when they were seeing some of the symbology, one of the pilots remarked there's a whole fleet of them, and he was seeing on his system what we were seeing on the ships. But as far as I know, I believe they only gained visual contact on 2 of them, but I'm not positive about that because I haven't seen anything or talked to anyone on the other ships.
Right. So but
I suspect there was more visual contact than what I'm aware of.
When
no one's talked about it.
When these jets were in the air, how many contacts do you recall that you saw on radar at that time?
14.
Okay, so there were 14.
Yeah, I had 14 at the time.
Okay. What do you recall the weather conditions and the sea conditions for that day?
Oh, it was sea state 0 and beautiful clear sky.
Okay. Do you know if during this event was NORAD ever involved?
I do not believe so.
Yeah, by involved I meant notified, I guess.
Now the squadron sent out a after action report, and I'd have to look at the message headers to see who was all it was addressed to. But it would not surprise me that they knew about it. But we wouldn't typically operate tactically with NORAD when we're underway as a strike group.
Oh, okay.
It would be an after-action type of thing.
Right, so they would not have known about it at the point in time.
I don't believe so, no. Unless it was through the intel channels.
Right.
Which is kind of a different function, and they may have been in contact with them, I don't know.
Do you know if they would have the ability with their own radar systems to have detected these objects?
The civilian radars on the West Coast are all linked together, and there's a composite picture that they received, so I think technically they had the ability to know what they were looking at. I don't...
Do you know if there was any investigation involved?
I didn't think so until last summer when I was visited myself by a couple guys. I thought it had been swept under the carpet and basically forgotten about, and no one wanted to talk about it. I wasn't aware there was an investigation going on at all.
So did these guys actually ask you questions about this event?
No. In fact, they seemed to be more interested in my mining claim up in the Kalmiopsis wilderness. They came and saw me probably, maybe 6 different times over the course of a couple weeks. And then I never saw them again.
Okay. Were there any other radar operators besides yourself on the Princeton at the time?
Yeah, our entire team. There's probably 18 people at any one time looking at radars.
Are the other radar operators of the same rank as you, or?
Everybody was junior to me.
Oh, okay, so you were the senior.
I was the most senior enlisted guy.
Okay. So did they kind of go to you for questions, or how does what's the relationship?
Yeah. They don't really do much without either talking to me or talking to one of the officers, in charge of combat.
And then
everything we do in there is choreographed. I mean, there's a certain way we process all the radar information. Everybody takes their turn to kick in their pieces of the puzzle based on this system they're looking at and the information they have, and that's how we make our identifications.
Okay. And so earlier you had mentioned to me that you were surprised that prior to the 14th, there were these unknown targets showing up, but no one was paying attention to them. Was that?
It didn't seem to me they were.
Was this the other 4 guys that were junior to you?
Yeah, the other radar operators and also the fire controlmen as well. They were also in combat. No one seemed to be paying any attention to them.
Okay. And so if you were...
I still don't know why. It was weird.
So since you were the senior guy, and there's no right answer to this, I'm just curious.
Why didn't I say something?
Yeah.
Well, because it was my last underway, and I've been training these guys, for a year or better. And I didn't perceive the context as a threat because we're off the coast of San Diego and they obviously weren't coming to hurt us or anything. So I was kind of holding back a little to see if someone else would detect them, like we were trained to do.
Right.
That's kind of, my assessment was they weren't a threat at all to us.
Okay. And now,
that's why I held back a little bit. I held off as long as I could, and we're getting ready to launch a huge exercise that we'd been planning for months. And there was probably going to end up being 30 aircraft in the sky.
Okay.
Between the bad guys and the good guys.
Right.
As part of the simulation. And at that point, I knew that these things, at the very least, they were a hazard to air navigation.
Right. And at that moment,
I recommended to Captain Smith, we better intercept this and find out what it is.
And at that moment in time, how many contacts did you have of the unknown?
There were 14 airborne that morning.
There was 14. Can you just discuss briefly the Navy's ability on a war exercise like this to know if a jet from wherever, if it were to stray in your area, how quickly or easily you would know?
We train for that every day, every minute of the day. As soon as it comes into our radar ball, going seconds later, we'll identify it as a commercial aircraft. It's not hard for us.
Okay. And then
based on the electronic signatures and stuff that's coming off the airplane. We have systems that are designed to detect them.
What was the reaction of this event by the higher level officers on board?
Shock and awe. I remember Captain Smith told me, I was talking to him privately, and I said, well, Captain, what do you think this stuff really was? And he said, I don't know, ice particles? I just laughed. He started laughing. No one knows.
Right.
No. It was well beyond any of our experiences.
Were there any specific instructions not to discuss the event?
No. Nope.
Do you know if there were any unusual pings on sonar during this event?
Not that I'm aware of. And I think the USS Louisville, someone contacted them at some point in time, and I believe they reported that they didn't hear a thing. So if these things went down into the water, just like there was no sonic boom, they were somehow able to keep it quiet. If there was something splashing around the water, you can bet they were going to hear it. I mean, that's their job.
But could it have been any type of ghost blimps or artifacts on your radar?
Impossible. We had too many systems tracking it. Different radar types, different radar systems, the composite from all those radar systems put together. There was no, we have a system called identification for interfoe, IFF. Mm-hmm. There was no IFF coming off the contacts at all. Whatever they were really there. I'm positive about it.
Was there any indication that there was some jamming going on from these objects?
There was not. We have what they call an electronic warfare suite operator. Uh-huh. And that's, by the way, one of the ways we detected the commercial airliners based on the type of electronic signals coming off the aircraft. That's how we identify a lot of stuff.
Okay.
In addition to some of our other techniques, there was nothing, no jamming, no electronic signals at all that I know of coming off these objects.
Is it possible that he could have experienced electronic jamming while you guys didn't?
Oh, absolutely. He could have got a pencil beam directed straight at him and not at anyone else.
Oh, okay. Okay. You had a very high quality track. Was it always high quality, or was there ever times when it was not?
It was 100% high quality the entire time.
And that was whether you were looking at 14 of them or 50?
Yeah. Now, the 50 number was a cumulative number over, several days.
Right, okay,
The most I ever saw at one time was around 14.
Right, okay, good point.
In a fleet.
Glad
I'm calling them a fleet because they were kind of like a fleet of objects.
Right, okay. And when you were tracking them from Catalina towards that area, what was the altitude and the speed?
Anywhere, they were going 100 knots. and I know they were as high as 80,000 feet, maybe higher, because our scan volume was only set to 80,000 at the time on the radar. But mostly I was observing them about 28,000 feet. And that was my concern the morning of the 8X, because that was right in our playground altitude area. The objects were right in the same airspace that we were going to be playing in.
Okay, so when you're talking about 28,000 feet, you were talking about earlier when they scrambled the jets.
Yeah, and these things were weird. I mean, it would be at 80,000 feet, and then you'd look again, and all of a sudden they're at 28,000 feet, or 20,000 feet. Then they go back to 80,000 feet. This was like a number of days before.
Okay.
But sitting there in the chair and observing them over the course of days,
So,
I think they were more at about 28,000 feet than any other altitude.
okay. So as a clarification question, tell me if my understanding of this is correct. If they were at 28,000 feet or 20,000 feet or near the surface, you knew that altitude was correct. But if they were at 80,000 feet...
Absolutely. Our altitude is extremely precise on the Spy 1 radar.
Right, but
It's within meters.
the only error would be when they were at 80,000 feet because you set your envelope there.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Now, another interesting thing happened too. On the first intercept, the objects went down, and then we pushed them back to a combat air patrol station. We call them the cap stations.
Uh-huh.
And then one of those objects instantly appeared right where his cap station was, which was probably 60 miles away from where the merge plot happened. We were like, the air controller's like, you're not going to believe this, sir, but the context is at your cap station.
And explain to me what cap station is.
Yeah, when we're out in a strike group, we got we control the airspace all around us. So if anything comes at us, we can intercept it and destroy it or identify it. And those points in space are set in advance so people know what we're talking about. And we give them names. It could be any name. You could call them taco, burrito, and spaghetti. I mean, so we tell the guy to go back to taco cap station, and he knows where that is in space, what altitude and what lat and long.
So a cap point is a random point that you guys have identified ahead of time.
Absolutely. It's a combat air patrol cap. How the hell did it know where the cap station was? I mean, it was right on it. Directly on it. Not close by it, but on it. On that point in space.
Okay. Wow, this is bizarre.
Yeah. Now you know I haven't said much in 13 years. Got the relative bearing and the altitude. Went up top side of the ship to the big eyes, which are shipboard binoculars the lookout uses. And I looked at one of these things.
What altitude was it at?
The one I went up and looked at was at 28,000 feet.
Okay. And his speed at the time?
100 knots.
100 knots.
Tracking south. Yep. I saw a soft, glowing white light in the sky.
Was it close enough you could see any detail?
No. It was just there was a light bulb in the sky, basically.
And then how long did that observation go before?
I stood up there and observed it for probably 10 minutes, scratching my head.
Was there any signs that these objects had any type of stealth ability?
I think it's interesting that the APG-73 radars on the FNA-18 Super Hornet aircraft, as far as I know, they never saw them on radar for some reason. Now, they had them on their infrared systems, but they never held them on radar. So, I guess it's possible, because that particular radar system was not seeing them. So maybe they were cloaked for that radar system, but not the others. I don't know. I guess that probably is possible.
Were you able to hear the communications between the F-18s and the Princeton?
Absolutely. We had it in our overhead speaker. The whole watch team was hearing it.
Oh, okay. What do you recall about the communications just between the F-18s and the Princetons in terms of...
I'm engaged, oh shit. That was the most memorable comment. That was Captain Saber. He's like, oh, I'm engaged.
And when he says...
They were freaking out.
Ehi, sei uno scettico negazionista che vede solo lanterne cinesi, palloni meteorologici, fulmini globulari? Sai già cosa fare. Ma se invece non hai dei pregiudizi e sei solo curioso di capire cosa sta accadendo, partecipa, commenta e condividi il video. Al prossimo episodio!